Over a year ago now, I posted a video called Dragonbane Has Flaws. A lot of people had a lot of things to say about that video, and now I'm here to say, or ask, or discuss, was I wrong? Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the channel. This is The Sacred Art of Gaming, where we love exploring games, telling stories, building worlds, and dabbling with some mechanics. And today we're going to talk about my previous points for Dragonbane. And it was really like three main points. So the main things that I spoke about was the skills and how I felt like they were imbalanced in some ways, and it kind of didn't lead to the power fantasy that I guess everyone wanted, that I knew anyways at my table. The other big one probably being spell casting, and then the last one being like heroic abilities. So let's talk, because nothing gets a bunch of nerds more riled up than discussing mechanics. And man, the tenacity. I do appreciate everyone who was in the comments and was able to speak in a constructive way, because there were some people who were just like straight up wrong, or were quoting old versions of the PDF that haven't been around in a while, or just weren't even like the official version. There were some people that were just like angry. I didn't know Dragonbane had a audience like that. And then some people was just dropping some knowledge, and which was very helpful. And then some people just kind of threw in their 2 cents if they agreed or whatever. Some things that I can see were wrong, based off of the way that if you view that video in a vacuum, just that video alone, I can see if you just take that at face value, which a lot of people watched that video, but not everyone watched other Dragonbane videos that I had. So I said something about magical mishaps. I made a kind of offhanded comment about if you fail, then you have to deal with magical mishaps, and I said that kind of offhandedly, but yes, you do have to roll a demon to be dealing with magical mishaps. So in the context of just that video alone, yeah, I could see how that would be wrong, and you'd be right. And then metal can't be equipped. This is an interesting one, because yeah, it can't be equipped, but you can have it in your inventory, which spirals into a whole bunch of other things. We'll probably dive into that more. I think it's worth mentioning the context of that video at that time. That was coming off of like a group play, trying to get players who, and I kept mentioning Savage Worlds and D&D 5th edition because that group primarily plays those types of games. 5th edition being, I don't know, it's just 5th edition, right? Like some of the complaints could have been like, oh, there's just so many steps. You have to roll to cast, and then you roll for damage. Sometimes you roll to resist and stuff. Okay, sure. While also dealing with the willpower points. So yeah, there's all those things. Savage Worlds kind of in a similar vein to this, but adds a little bit more modularity with how you can play with the spells, which is probably my preference. That's not to say that this is bad. I think what people in that group wanted, not to say, like, I know some people can just point the finger and be like, they're just 5th edition, they want it to be like 5e or Savage Worlds, they should just play that. That's kind of like a cop-out, I feel like. So I think really what they were getting after was options to get to their power fantasy, and they were willing to make the sacrifices, whether it being a heroic ability or a special type of item. They were cool with doing that to get to specific types of play styles that they were looking for. And maybe you could argue that those play styles just don't exist in this game, which, you know, is a whole other thing. So it definitely is different from 5e, different from maybe Savage Pathfinder, but there are definitely like Lankmar. I would say Lankmar is certainly like within the same vein as Dragonbane, maybe even like lower fantasy. So, and that being a part of Savage Worlds. So let's talk about like the magic process a little bit. So we said that it was a lot. You have your requirements, word, gesture, focus, ingredients, pretty standard stuff there. Then your roll to cast, and then the willpower being lost. I think where a lot of people on the interwebs argue about this is that it sucks that the willpower points count for more than just magic. They also count for like your class ability or your race ability. When you cast and you fail, you lose that, and you don't have a lot of willpower points. So I think that is probably the majority of the hang up of spellcasting for Dragonbane. But I can see the argument of, bro, this is low fantasy, you risked it, and this is what you have now. This is it. And I had an interesting conversation with someone in the comments for the last video, and I was just like, well, what do you do? Like, you ran out of mana, you blew your load, so to speak, and it didn't pan out. So now what do you do? And they were just like, well, we just like heal. We just heal, and we just help other people in the party. And I'm like, doesn't that kind of suck though? And I guess it depends on your group. It depends on your group. So healing, I could see that being helpful, like maybe in combat, like just doing assists the whole time. I've been in Savage Worlds games where there's people that just run assists, and Savage Worlds is, I think, better at facilitating that type of play than Dragonbane. Dragonbane, you're kind of just like, hey man, I'm not doing anything, but you're gonna do something cool, and that's gonna be my whole session. That's now, reading what I'm reading now though, it doesn't seem like that has to be the case. You roll to cast, you lose the willpower points regardless. You cast the spell, and then you roll damage, or they roll resistance. That is, like, I would say, kind of reasonable. I think that's in line with what Savage Worlds does too. There was some frustration with them rolling and then the enemy also rolling in addition to that, but they tend to be for something fairly powerful like sleep. And then it's 2 willpower points per power level, so you can boost those up, and I compared those to like melee weapons, which, I mean, I still don't think players were wrong to say like, yeah, you can just always have a melee weapon and just continue to hit, but this is ranged and you have a little bit more modularity to it. You can hit multiple people. Sure, I think it's in line. And then being 1 willpower for tricks, which are meh. I think a big part of this too was that at the time, there were very few spells and types of magic that you could utilize in Dragonbane. Now we have the Book of Magic, at least in PDF, not physically yet, and that adds a lot more options, and that adds a lot of fun stuff. Yeah, I think that group, they just really wanted to diversify the power fantasy of a mage and different types of mages, which I don't think is unreasonable, but if Dragonbane just wants to be a very specific thing, and I think a lot of fantasy games are not. A lot of fantasy games, and I think Dragonbane's like somewhere in between. It's not really like very specific, but it's more specific than like Forgotten Realms, which is like everything. So there have been books like the Book of Magic and Traditions, where is it? Yeah, Traditions from Beyond the Veil, other third-party supplements, where they provide options that solve some of these problems, like the obsidian weapons and armor. They don't want to be handed this stuff, they want to be able to work for it and have the ability to do that at some point. How do I feel about magic? Was I wrong about the magic piece specifically? I would say yes. I would say yes. I think for me personally, and maybe I'm just more in line with like what I am willing to get out of Dragonbane, which I'm starting to feel like is maybe more like Dragon's Dogma adjacent, like the video game, that level of magic to some degree. I'm cool with it, and I think I'm cool with it because of realizing the very specific word choices used for metal. I do still prefer more modular magic like Vagabond, Ars Magica, Savage Worlds, but this is still pretty solid because you can boost up the power level, which is nice. So the implications of mishaps and metal, I kind of already talked about mishaps, but for metal, let me know in the comments your thoughts on this. But I could see an argument for, hey, I used all my magic. I can still use a staff or a club, or I think there's one other thing that you can, a sling. You can still use those things, which are something, but you can have a sword in your pack, in your inventory. And then if you're like no longer in magic mode, you can just pull out the sword. Now, your immersion, I think that's well, you spiral down this whole thing of, okay, so if I shoot someone with an arrow, that nullifies any mage, because now they have a metal arrow tip stuck in them. Mechanically, no, that is not the case, because it would be like, at most in their inventory, it would not be equipped. But thematically, I can understand how they're trying to explain, like, okay, metal nullifies magic, but there's a disconnect, I think, between the theme and the mechanics a little bit there, where it's easy for like a rascal to just poke at it a little bit and just say, this don't make no sense. I can have metal in my bag, I can't have it on my body, I can't have it on my hand. How does this work? Can I have it on my foot? Can I have it on my head? Can I have it in my mouth? Is it a touching thing? Why is it only in my hand? Silly questions, I know. Does it dispel magic? So like if I am cursed and I put a metal sword in my hand, have I now dispelled the curse? Just crazy silliness like that. I think it's solid, I think it's reasonable, a little bit of disconnect there, but yeah, still excellent game. What I do still think sucks is losing the willpower. Yeah, that's not great, but I think it's reasonable for this type of game. Other games have worse things that happen, Solomon Kane. Now, was I wrong about the skills and the heroic abilities? I don't think so. Maybe it'll be a little different with Arcan, because I've spent a lot of time outside with a lot of my characters, but awareness is like a super skill, and sure, you could probably argue that something like that is a super skill in every game. Awareness is a super skill. Bushcraft, I feel like, becomes a super skill. Myths and legends, persuasion, sneaking, spot hidden. I feel like you almost kind of have to have those skills in every game. Those are pretty big. Myths and legends, maybe not, but definitely persuasion, definitely awareness, definitely bushcraft, but when you're in an urban environment, then yeah, that kind of throws bushcraft out the window. I almost feel like they might need like different, like a streetwise or something. I don't know. The skills, they just don't. When I look at the skills and to compare it to some other games where you can very clearly get some of the skills and put them into categories of, if I want to be this type of character, it's this, which is very different than this type of character that is this. I know there was a lot of people that mentioned, hey man, intimidation, it's just in persuasion. Sure. But doesn't intimidation feel very different from persuasion, from like a power fantasy perspective? When I think of intimidation, I don't think of the bard necessarily. I think of the barbarian, which is a very different character. So yeah, there's that. It's fine, it's not bad, and it's very easy to house rule. And then the heroic abilities. They're kind of already doing this. I think their plan is probably to slowly roll this stuff out over time, because we're already getting third-party stuff that does address some of these concerns. But yeah, I mean, it's cool to have more options. I've had characters or players that have characters that are just like, I don't even know what to choose. Like, none of this really speaks to me in the build that I'm trying to go for. Sure, you can argue this is not a game for builds, but like, sure, it is fun to get stuff for your character that feels meaningful if you're trying to be someone who's good with a spear or something. Those are my thoughts. I would say, in my previous advice from the previous video where I did state some like fixes for magic, no, we don't need no fixes for magic. You don't need to get rid of the willpower cost or the roll to cast. I actually really love roll to cast. I think it's good the way it is. I had another conversation with someone about maybe willpower and mana being separately, but they were just like, no, that would break everything. And maybe that's true. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll run a test someday. There's some good storytelling in not being able to do the abilities. It just feels weird. And I think that's just the overarching lesson from this, other than more people may watch a video than you realize if it has any negativity tied to it. But it's that the mechanics and the theme, there's a little bit of a slight disconnect sometimes. And that slight disconnect can cause like a downward spiral of questioning that kind of leads you to nonsense. Those are my thoughts. How pumped are you for Dragonbane? Hopefully I'm getting my books pretty soon. I've already gone through the PDF quite extensively. I wanted to make a mage with the new spells, but as I was looking at them, I almost felt like, for the most part, they're a better accent to an existing mage, especially if it's a solo mage. A lot of them don't have like direct damage unless it's like evil kind of. So yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that because that's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the fun YouTube things, and I will see you in the next one as we continue to explore the sacred art of gaming together. I'm sorry.